welcome. Everyone who's online, keep getting food. I welcome all of you to keep eating, get seconds if you'd like. But I'm just going to get us started on our afternoon keynote. So hi, my name is Sara Mayorga Gallo. I'm an assistant professor here in sociology at UMass Boston. And it's my absolute pleasure to introduce today's keynote speaker, Dr. Eduardo Bonilla-Silva. Dr. Bonilla-Silva is professor of sociology at Duke University, and he is also president-elect of both the American Sociological Association and the Southern Sociological Society. He is perhaps, I'm sure many in this room voted for him. He is perhaps best known as the author of Racism Without Racists, Colorblind Racism and the Persistence of Racial Inequality in America, now in its 4th edition. He's also the author of White Supremacy and Racism in the Post-Civil Rights Era and co-editor of White Logic, White Methods, Race Epistemology in the Social Sciences, which won the Best Book Award in 2009 from the ASA section on racial and ethnic minorities. There are countless articles as well published in American Sociological Review, Ethnic and Racial Studies, Social Forces, Symbolic Interaction, among others. And Dr. Bonilla-Silva was also the 2011 recipient of the Cox-Johnson-Fraser Award from the American Sociological Association, which honors a scholar whose work is in the intellectual traditions of these 3 African-American scholars. He was also awarded the Louis A. Kozer Award from the ASA's theory section for theoretical agenda setting. And a couple of years ago, the Society for the Study of Social Problems, Division on Racial and Ethnic Minorities, named their book award the Eduardo Bonilla-Silva Outstanding Book Award, which is definitely career goals. So in short, he has been a major influence on the development of sociology over the last 20 years. And you'd think, given how intellectually influential he's been, he'd have no reason to also be a nice person. But of course, those of you who know him know that that's not the case. Dr. Bonilla-Silva was my graduate school advisor, and reading his work is what inspired me to become a sociologist when I was an undergraduate. He's an ideal mentor who helps you get, as he likes to say, to the sociological promised land. And I'm very grateful to have worked with him and very proud to be one of his students. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Bonilla-Silva.
Good afternoon, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I'm usually ready for prime time, but today I'm going to confess I'm a little bit intimidated for a number of reasons. First, I'm competing against arroz y habichuelas, rice and beans. That is tough. Secondly, we have a good crowd, mixed in the best way. People doing sociology, people not doing sociology, people doing trade politics, people doing academic politics, etc. And I'm trying to present today something on theory. And theory is like medicine. It tastes nasty. And it may be good for you, but it's still nasty. So I'm trying to somehow make theory palatable, but let's see how it's also new work. It's work in progress. That is what I call it, preliminary formulation. So be patient, but be aggressive in the question and answers, because I need to improve this presentation, because I'm going to use it for the next 6 months or so, so help me. So almost no one predicted Trump's, I don't want to call him Trump, let's call him 45. Okay. 45 times, okay. Including yours truly. Although in my case, I did post in June 2016, those of you who are my friends in Facebook. So I posted that he was serious, and I was critical of both Bernie and Hillary because I thought they were not doing enough. And at the time I called for a social movement to stop this, I classify his politics as reactionary populism, you know. And I claim that that is, it's not fascist, we can have a debate about that. I don't think it's fascism, but reactionary populism is equally problematic, in part because he got elected. I think a traditional fascist probably will not have gotten elected. Okay, so progressives missed predicting his victory, not simply because of technical matters, yeah? For example, not knowing about the mechanics of voting, or the hidden Trump vote, or the number of Latinos that ended up supporting Trump, or the minority minority apathy for Hillary Clinton, etc., or for not understanding that Hillary Clinton was an awful candidate who ran an extremely poor campaign. So I studied in Wisconsin. No way in hell she should have lost in Wisconsin. Okay, so that's because that's on her. We failed to take seriously the Trump 45 phenomenon. His name cannot be mentioned. So the 45 phenomenon, because of three interrelated factors. One, our lack of commitment to a structural or systemic theory of racism. And in this last electoral cycle, we quickly slipped back into the comfortable arms of our old friend, the prejudice problematic. Whenever we're in trouble, we go back to the same nonsense. Yeah? Second, because of our simplistic classification of 45 and his followers as the racists, yeah? While ignoring the racial posture of our liberal friends in the Democratic Party. And lastly, because of our limited appreciation of the class-race nexus and how it worked in 45's advantage in this cycle. To this, I add, not accepting that despite the seeming increase in old-fashioned prejudice in the nation, colorblind is still hegemonic. I'm going to make that very strongly and let's push back. Yeah? Accordingly, my goal today is to explain why we missed the mark during the election, why we might still be missing the mark now, and what we might consider doing to avoid continuing missing the mark. Although my remarks will be theoretical, after all, it is a social theory forum, okay? The concerns that orient them are eminently political. And they have to, as 45's reactionary populism is, and I hope we all agree, extremely dangerous. It's also crazy. That's independent of his politics. Usually cannot defeat crazy. Anyway, so because of that, it requires us, social scientists, to be less like Weber, who advocated for objectivity in the social science, dispassion, etc. And I think we have to be more like Marx, Du Bois, I.W. Wells, and others, people in the business of changing the world. No shame in that game. So today I will do 4 things. First, state once again why we need to anchor our analysis of race matters in a structural theory. Second, advance an important revision to the racial theory I developed 20-some years ago to account for the importance of emotion. One advantage of getting all this that you can afford to engage in self-criticism because it's like, whatever. Yeah? Some years ago, I would have been very defensive of anyone criticizing me. And like now, I take it with a style. Yeah? Third, describe briefly the racial ideological landscape of the nation. Introduce the notion of racial ideological articulation, and address briefly the all-important class-race nexus. Finally, we conclude with an addendum, depending on time, adding a few more theoretical things that we might consider doing, and trying to connect the dots on everything I have said today. So let me begin. So let me begin with the theoretical foundation we still need to articulate the right politics. I'm talking like the Marxists of yesteryear. Right politics, yeah? As some of you know, I have been preaching for more than 20 years that the common sense view on racism, formalized by us in the academy with what I call the Trinity formula: prejudice that may lead to attitudes that may lead to discrimination, limits our potential for understanding the depth of the racial order of things. First, this approach forces us to engage in a clinical analysis of whites. Good white, bad white, in between white, definitely bad white, rather than in a collective examination of the phenomenon. Second, this perspective does not explain how racism is institutionalized. That is, it does not help us appreciate that organizations, whether we're talking about states or colleges, churches, or indeed sociology departments, produce racialized outcomes, not because of the action of a few individuals, the so-called racists, but due to the racialized character of the organization. And once you have the racialized character of the organization, you have mechanisms and practices that reproduce racialization. Third, this view assumes racism is the product of the irrationality and stupidity of the races. Hence, the phenomenon is viewed as a modern way of thinking, of the few, mostly undereducated, working class Southern whites. This election was a good example. And if we frame the phenomenon of irrationality and stupidity, what is the solution? Education, or take your Prozac, your anti-racist Prozac. In sharp contrast, in my 1997 ASR article, Rethinking Racism, I advanced a structural interpretation. Oh, am I there? I argued that racism emerged in modernity, that is in the 15th century or so, when the logic and practice of race was used to justify colonization, land dispossession, genocide, and extreme labor exploitation. And once the logic and practice of race congealed into the matrix, the social matrix of domination of modern societies, systemic racism became foundational, as all social actors and practices in the modern world system became racialized. There's a book by Howard Weiner. When the world was a ghetto or something like that. The implications of this perspective, which I labeled the racialized social systems approach. We need to do better with labels. That was my label 20 years ago, and now I'm like, it doesn't stick with anyone. But that's the way I got it. So the implications of that systemic or structural theory I think are quite important. First, because all actors and social practices in modernity are racialized, focusing on the races, Trump and his supporters, is a big mistake. In the 2016 cycle, for example, it led us to ignore that Clinton's white supporters were also racialized. Even those who call themselves liberals, progressives, and even some who claim to be anti-racist. Matt Huey wrote a book addressing how even the anti-racists may connect with the traditional racists. More significantly, it steered us away from discussing the normative, common mechanisms and practices responsible for contemporary racial inequality. Second, because actors racialized as white or white life receive a better socioeconomic and even psychological deal, I claim that they develop a material interest in defending the racial order of things. It's interesting, 20 years later, people have criticized me for a lot of things. This, which I think is the core of the theory, nobody wanted to pick a fight with that, because that's the essence. Do whites receive benefits and develop interest in defending the way things are? I think that's the crux of the matter. Therefore, whites support the racial order of things in various ways. Sometimes aggressively. Those are the folks that we identify as the racists. And I think that in any social order, the aggressive defense of interest is the smaller way in which we do reproduce domination. Most people do the passive-aggressive, or they just exhibit what Tyrone Foreman calls racial apathy, or they just follow the dominant racial script. Normativity in race or gender or class matters is more important than the extremes. That doesn't mean that some of us need to examine and study the extremes, but I'm more about what is the main way in which we reproduce the system of domination. Third, racialization is, first, a continuous, never-ending process. So races are made and remade and remade and remade, yeah? Second, it changes in response to racial contestation. So we, the victims of racial oppression, as well as those who practice domination, engage in a battle, and therefore racialization can change, yeah? And lastly, racialization is an imperfect process that does not produce 100% categorical certainty. Think about it. If races were made and there was no space for possibilities, because you are white and that means I know you 100%, then the only solution is off with their head, yeah? And I think that obviously this imperfection allows us to think of possibilities, of engagements, of political praxis to change white folks, yeah? It also means that we, folks of color, are also imperfectly racialized, so there is also variation, yeah? And those of us in the academy or in the streets know that not every person of color is on our team, yeah? Some of them we are like, you should go to the other team. Race making and race shaping of social institutions flows with currents of protest and other large-scale social changes, and can produce important transformations in the racial order, albeit, as with all historical processes, there are no guarantees. That means we don't know the end of history. Yeah? I used to be a vulgar Marxist, so I used to believe the formulas, yeah? So we already knew the end of history. It's a bit more complicated, yeah? So that's why praxis is so important, and that's why analytical Marxism doesn't work, yeah? Because you need to be engaged in politics to be able to open possibilities, yeah? The actors and processes that are racialized, as I mentioned, are imperfectly so. Hence, we can construct a praxis of racial change. Even ardent Trumpistas can be changed as they have ambivalences, fractures, and arguably are the most vulnerable whites in America. So we have seen already in the first 2 months, we don't have systematic data, I believe, but you watch Van Jones and some of the CNN stuff, and it looks like there is some discontent among the white masses who voted for Trump, and I'm like, I didn't know he was going to be crazy like that. I'm like, well, you should have paid attention. So this structural perspective on racism has gained credibility since the 1990s. It was even mentioned by Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. Did you catch that? In the election, both of them talk about institutional racism. One of them even talk about systemic racism. Now, unfortunately, they don't know what the hell they were talking about. So one of their advisors told them, hey, mention that because the Black Lives Matter people are pushing, so say something. And as an aside, as someone who, I was neither Hillary supporter nor a Sanderista, but I thought that Sanders was better than Hillary. But I got concerns and they were confirmed. My concerns were he didn't know shit about this. And since the election, what has he done? 2 things that are for me like, things that make me go, One, he made the comment about identity politics. Did you catch that? Okay, so that's code word, yeah? So we know what it means. And if we have any doubts, in the last month, it has been a singular campaign to reconnect with poor whites and working class folks. I'm not saying that we don't have to connect with them. Actually, I'm going to make a strong claim that we should. But not at the expense of, particularly when you have limited connections and understandings of the plight of people of color, which arguably was one reason why you couldn't get to the promised land, because you didn't do your job, yeah? You remember that scene when he went to a black church? And he goes, that guy doesn't get it. He's like, hello. However, the beginning of a potential structural conversation on racism in America, in part pushed by the Black Lives Matter activists, quickly collapsed with the rise of Trumpism. We succumbed to the strong silent call of the prejudice perspective, yeah? We saw those people saying and doing nasty things, and they did say and they do nasty things. Hence, we did not object to the barrage of stories about the geography of racism in America. If you remember images like this, yeah? You remember? We still have images like that, yeah? That's a Google searches of the word, the N-word. Oh, I know, if you use the N-word, definitely. Which connects with the history of us claiming that the races are fundamentally located in the deep south. When in truth, the races are all over. And actually, as I have argued, they should never, the races, but the racism. Yeah? The more we focus on the races, the less we analyze the system that manufactures variations of strategies and practices that reproduce racial domination. Yeah? Some folks may be nicer, but they're still racialized. Yeah? And many of them work in sociology department, unfortunately. I'm the president-elect of the, don't impeach me, of the Sociology Association, but I do know that for me, I don't get help from the folks that the traditional racists. Yeah? They're not the ones who are giving me help 24/7. It's the liberal ones. Yeah? Some of them call themselves anti-racist whites. Yeah? Who are some of my best friends, except that they never help me. What is your name again? I know you're my best friend. What is your name? So let me now outline a revision of my structural theory of racism, and one that I'm literally working on as we speak. So be gentle, push, but be gentle. Let me first, however, restate that I firmly believe that we cannot fully appreciate racial affairs if we do not anchor the phenomenon materially. That is, racism cannot be just a free-floating ideology, a prejudice, yeah? And a more historical legacy, as some people claim. Oh, we have racism because we have slavery. I'm like, come on, how long? And a key phenomenon of class, what many vulgar Marxists used to believe, or simply a psychological maladjustment. Yeah? Otherwise, the theory of the case is something like this. Categorical domination is based on the actions of racist, sexist, and elitist pigs. That's one way of thinking about the world. Yeah? But we're sociologists, we know better. Domination, and I hope we all agree, cannot depend on randomness. Yeah? On whether, for instance, the racists actively work to maintain race inequality. This is why social systems such as capitalism, patriarchy, and racism emerge to guarantee continuity and the systemic reproduction of categorical inequalities. But here is the rub. Here is that I'm going to say that I was partially right. Partially right is not bad. People's interests are not restricted to bread alone, or a royal habichuela, which is delicious. That is, the economic understanding of interest that old-fashioned materialists hold. That was me on the judge. Yeah? This is what Paula Ionide so forcefully articulates in her important yet imperfect book, The Emotional Politics of Racism. If you haven't read that book, check it out. Or Angela Davis in her short but marvelous book, Freedom is a Constant Struggle. Although we still have to push hard for a structural understanding of racism, we must begin expanding the notion of material interest to include the affective dimension. And I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time. As I am working on this, I will simply outline a few things. And again, it's a moment in history, so we all, we want to present our best foot forward. And we want to be articulate and clear and deep and sound. But with Trump, I think this is a special moment and we need to be quicker. How good is for you to develop the analysis of stuff when Trump is going like a hurricane, changing everything and challenging everything? That forces us, unfortunately, to be quicker, but that's what the moment demands. So therefore, I'm taking a risk, but what the hell? That's what I think we need to do at this historical juncture. First, racialized emotions are anchored in our subjectivity. A social collectivity such as race, class, or gender cannot be constructed objectively, purely. Yeah? These categories were made and are remade historically, and were and are charged always emotional. You cannot just say, okay, you are white, you are a woman, that's it. That's your objective. You also create a subjectivity, an emotional dimension to the category. Yeah? Therefore, the racial subject, to use the term by David Goldberg, then is also an emotive subject who feels race. Are you feeling it? On this, Memmi said it best in his book, Racism, and he said, a refutation of racism's formal arguments is wholly insufficient. One must strip bare the underlying system of emotions and convictions. Emotions and convictions that structure its discourse and govern its conduct. The first task then is to describe its experiential structure and reveal the conscious mechanisms that issue from it, in order to set in motion a means of appropriate counteraction. Third, the racial economy of emotions is relational. That means that racialized emotions tend to correspond to the position of the actor in the racial hierarchy. Thus, whites, anger, I'm angry about those people getting good jobs. Eduardo elected president, that must be some affirmative action thing. I tell my students that, jokingly, we can discover the cure to cancer and AIDS at the same time. And white people will be like, yeah, affirmative action. You're going to get some reverse racism. You have cancer, you're not going to get the cure because it's my cure, I own it. That's a nasty problem. So therefore, white's anger is defensive of their perceived interests, and the anger of our anger as people of color is not surprisingly also based on our standing and is central, is important for defending social actions, developing social actions and movements to change our position. Yeah? So anger is viewed negatively in the sociology of emotions, but without anger, how do you develop a movement? How do you do a revolution if you're going to be like, hello, I'm so happy to be oppressed. Can we all just get along? Fourth, emotions run the gamut. Thus, although social analysts mostly focus on the so-called negative emotions, anger and hate, emotions that I already mentioned can be important and positive in the sense of without that you cannot develop social movements. Yeah? We must understand that there are also positive emotions that need to be analyzed. For example, there is pleasure in domination. Foucault wrote about that. And there is pleasure in racial domination. Yeah? You see the pictures of all those police officers brutalizing tons of color. And you see their faces. When you're doing something so terribly inhuman, you must feel bad. They don't, because they are disciplining the other. Those people who are criminals, who deserve to be punished. So I'm calling for people to study a little bit, or actually a lot, this element of pleasure in domination. Yeah? So neither whites nor non-whites could have survived the racial game if all the emotions produced by the racial order were negative. Yeah? I was telling Alton this morning that sometimes I go to a departmental event, and these white spaces are really comfortable for white people. They laugh, and then the few of us, usually it's one or two, we try and we navigate, and all of a sudden we go in a corner, and then one of our students joins. You're nodding, yeah? You have been there, yes? And then we are in that corner, and then later we hear our colleagues, so you guys self-segregate. I'm like, excuse me? So anyway, on our side, again, this element of so-called self-segregation, which has a history that goes back to slavery, yeah? When we were self-segregated. Yeah? So we also produce community. We would not have survived slavery, Jim Crow, and we would not survive today if we don't have an element of community. Yeah? If our 24/7 was only dealing with people who want to put us down, challenge us intellectually, emotionally, etc., it would be like it would be emotionally drained. It is emotionally drained. Yeah? And then that's why we need to have those spaces or moments I'm with my folks. I need to relax. Yeah? So it's me and Johnny Walker Black. So, fifth, The racialized subject is not perfectly manufactured, as I argue. It has fractures and vulnerabilities which have allowed throughout history the production of solidarities across the color line. We have had what Iona labels affective receptivity. We sociologists would call that probably empathy. Yeah? In historical moments such as the Bacon Rebellion, the 19th century populist movement, the 1960 civil rights movement, as well as in the manifold smaller micro-level solidarities we all experience with white folks sort of treating us just as humans. It looks like a accomplishment. Yeah? Believe it or not, it is. In a racialized society, having a white person treating us fully as equals is an accomplishment and it's a challenge. Yeah? I suggest to you that doesn't happen as often as it should. Yeah? But please, as comedian Larry David would say, curb your enthusiasm. Despite the fractures I'm pointing out today, despite the moments in history and the individual level actions of kindness and humanity from whites toward us, whiteness has reproduced itself for centuries, which suggests that engaging the fractured white soul is not and will not be a picnic. Okay, so let me now talk about the contemporary racial ideological landscape. My publisher told me I need to leave it for 3 seconds. Some kind of psychological thing. So in my book, Racing Without Races, I argue that the new racial ideology dominates the field, and I call that colorblind racism. However, I stated in the book and elsewhere that no ideology, racial or otherwise, proves any polity 100% at any point in time. Okay? You always have more than one ideology competing. Yeah? This means that although colorblind racism is hegemonic, there are still strong pockets of old-fashioned, Jim Crow, unreconstructed racism, if you will, yeah? Out there. How many whites are still in that old drama? Well, as a sort of structural analyst of racism, I am less into counting, yeah? Because for me it's more about the system that produced variations of the thing, yeah? But if you push me, I'm going to guesstimate that the proportion of whites who are not seeing in colorblind stuff is in the 8 to 10%. I never bought the 50% number that Hillary Clinton offered in the campaign. Remember? The deplorables? By the way, this does not mean that 8 to 10% of whites belong to the Klan or are fascists, yeah? But it means that because a non-trivial segment of the white community is subscribing to outmerited views, we must pay serious attention to this segment, yeah? These are the segments that are very aggressive and you know what they can do to us. Nevertheless, I want to point out that not all the whites spewing the old-fashioned racial poison do so in the same way as whites did yesteryears. That is ideology 101. Ideologies change and is sort of meaning in the service of power. Therefore, you got to be able to accommodate to times, and you may be able to re-articulate some things and soften the blow if need be. So, variations in tone and racial ideological articulations between the old and new abound. Okay? So, for example, 45 made racially crude remarks. Yeah? Remember his first statement, you know, those Mexicans are a bunch of rapists and thieves and this and they're bad hombres, yeah? And had a record of racial discrimination in housing and in dealing with black employees, and reputedly has a personal, traditional racist views, in part imbued by his own father. So there is a book, a biography book that shows that his father was an old-fashioned racist. And those things sort of stick, yeah? Now, despite all this, during the campaign, he insisted that he was the least racist person you ever met. I know it sounds funny. The articulation of old and new did not work perfectly. Yeah, he's an older white man. So he's trying with the colorblind, but he doesn't get it, yeah? Or recently, he says, I'm the least anti-Semitic person you can meet. What does that mean? It's like, I'm like 15% anti-Semite and I'm 85% good. You know, it's like, come on, no one talks like that, yeah? Okay. He also said that, so that was okay. He also said that he loved Mexicans and Mexicans loved him back. He also, to show his support for Latinos, I'm in Trump Tower eating Cinco de Mayo, so I'm eating my taco salad. He also said that I love the Muslims. Someone should tell him, remove them. I love the Muslims. I think they're great people. So this racialized articulation has been coded by the media as not really racism, which contrasts with how they deal with characters such as Donald Sterling, remember the former owner of the Clippers, or the Nevada rancher Clyde Bundy, or David Duke, or more recently, Richard Spencer, the leader of the so-called alt-right. In this case, these are fascists. Okay? This we can call them what they are. Yeah? So to be a racist in the contemporary landscape, and this is problematic for us because it doesn't allow us to develop a politics to deal with contemporary racism. To be a racist, you have to be out there. Yeah? You really have to be like, yeah, I'm a racist. Yeah? And these days, even David Duke says, I'm not a racist, I'm just pro-white. Yeah? So I assume most of you are familiar with my argument about colorblind racism, so I will not dwell on it. I will say that the core of this ideology is what I call abstract liberalism, yeah? Which is the abstract extension of the principles of liberalism to race affairs, yeah? Which allow whites these days to say things such as, I'm all for equal opportunity. That is why I'm against affirmative action, because affirmative action is discrimination. And like, can you repeat that? It works, see, you don't have the animosity, even the anger, although that can be said in a compassionate, conservative way or in a nasty way. But the beauty is that you don't have to use the language of the past, yeah? And theoretically speaking, it looks like it's just a philosophical standpoint, of course. It's abstract liberalism because discrimination has not ended, yeah? So therefore, claiming that I'm all for equal opportunity and that's why you think that affirmative action reverses discrimination is nonsense. Because discrimination is alive and well. In the labor market, housing market, any market, yeah? So in the book I argue that this ideology is hegemonic, which means that all segments of the white community subscribe to it. And this is the part I'm going to do another self-critique. Today I criticize myself too much. Yeah? I wish I had done this better, but I did do this. I did say that different classes in the white community articulate the elements, the component parts of the ideology with different tones, intonations, etc. So some of the more working class people, I argue, use it in a more direct, crude way, whereas the middle class were more effective because they wanted to defend standing, yeah? So they are more effective in articulating this in a more compassionate, conservative way, yeah? Like, it's such a problem. I'm so, you know, those people in the inner city, they suffer a lot. And I'm so sorry that they have 300 kids and they are, you know, so, or you can say it in a nasty way, yeah? So this in part explains why most whites, regardless of their class, educational level or gender, supported Trump. So somehow we forgot that, yeah? And we have been focusing on the white working class, but all whites voted for him except for one segment, college educated women. But don't be again too happy because he was 49 to 45. And secondly, as I told you, let's not give a pass to a white person who voted for Hillary or who voted for Obama and still has a sticker. Oh, I wish he could be a third-term president. I love Obama, yeah? I don't love the other people, but I love Obama. He's a respectable black man, yeah? Okay, you don't find that funny. So the following examples illustrate the similarities in the racial views of working and middle-class whites. First is Bob Hardy, mayor of the city of Westlake in Louisiana, in Arlie Hochschild's problematic book, Strangers in Their Own Land. We can talk about her book, yeah? So, he said, I have had enough of poor me. I don't like the government paying on wed mothers to have a lot of kids, and I don't go for affirmative action. I met this one black guy who complained he couldn't get a job. Come to find out, he'd been to a private school. I went to public school like everyone else I know. No one should be getting a job to fill some mandated racial quota or getting state money not to work. How different is the mayor's view from that of John Avery, a worker in Youngstown, Ohio, interviewed in Joel Hess, again, extremely problematic book, The New Minority. Sometimes even in bad books, you can get some material to make it worse. There are a lot of people who abuse welfare. I am running around busting my hump while another guy sits on his porch. That's not right. I get food assistance, contradiction, I'm on welfare. I get food assistance and medical from the government because of my daughter. But I go to work every day, even after I broke my leg. You have to earn it. People on welfare are driving around in new cars, and I can't afford the vehicle. The government pays the rent and utilities, and so they spend the cash on gold chains and a Cadillac, when I can barely afford my Cavalier. My father used to have a Cavalier. People will take advantage of things any way they can. And these views are not really new, as we have had data on the racial views of white workers and middle-class folks for years. For instance, Al Riccardi, a taxi driver quoted in Lillian Rubin's Families of the Fault Line, book published in 1994, data was got in the late 1980s, stated, those people, they are hollering all the time about discrimination. Maybe once a long time ago, remember my book, The Past is the Past. Maybe once a long time ago, that was true, but not now. The problem is that a lot of those people are lazy. There's plenty of opportunities. There is plenty of opportunities. But you got to be willing to work hard. Then he was pressed, who are those people? And he said, come on, you know who I'm talking about. It's mostly the black people, but the Spanish ones too, in el Latino. So my point on the similarities is that the racial views of poor and middle-class whites is not a new one. Okay, I'm not breaking new ground here. Barbara Ehrenreich said the same thing in her 1990 book, Fear of Falling, the inner life of the middle class, meaning the white middle class. Sometimes we forget to add the white middle class. Yeah? And I quote her, on most of the key backlash issues, as defined by the media, it was hard to distinguish the blue-collar people, meaning white blue-collar workers, singled out by the news magazines from the rest of the middle Americans, meaning middle-class white Americans. Yeah? In my own work, gathered in the late 90s, John II, a retired architect, said the following about the idea of reparation. Not a nickel, not a nickel. I think that's ridiculous. I think that is a great way to get the black vote. But I think that's a ridiculous assumption, because those that say we should pay them because they were slaves back in the past, and yet, how often do you hear about the people who were white, that were slaves, and the whites that were, oh, we should get reparations. The Irish should get reparations from the English. Okay, so let me then try to put everything together. We have many other needs in terms of racial theory that are necessary to develop a political praxis to advance our struggle. But as time is of the essence, I will mention but a few. Interested parties may want to check two pieces I recently wrote in the Sociology of Race and Ethnicity Journal, a marvelous new journal that we all need to support. So let me first talk about epistemology and race. 5 minutes, good. We still have to struggle for our own theoretical, methodological, and epistemological liberation. Kufu Zubair and I wrote the book, Why Logic, Why Method, and I think that is sort of the beginning of the kind of things that we need to be thinking about and doing. Yeah? The angles we bring to discussions on race matters are crucial and based on our position in the racial hierarchy. Experiential knowledge counts. But as I stated in my piece, I'm getting old, I'm quoting myself. We are cognizant that mainstream race scholars, most of whom are white, will continue focusing on assimilation, insisting that ethnicity and boundaries are better conceptual tools to study race, and claiming that race is declining in significance, while the world racism has made burns hot and heavy. I need to mention this slide, so I pay 1 minute. I want to talk about deep whiteness, or what I call the white sheet. W.E.B. Du Bois stated in his essay, The Souls of White Folk, and I quote him, "Whiteness is the ownership of the earth forever and ever. Amen. And ponder about the effect of a man or a nation," I'm quoting him again, "when it comes passionately to believe such an extraordinary dictum. We cannot develop the deep solidarity needed to form a movement for racial justice when the soul of so many of our allies is still white. When whites still do not believe we are truly their equals. And this belief may be unconscious, as Shannon Sullivan argues in her nice book, Revealing Whiteness. Whites express this belief in so many behaviors that confirm to us that they are not truly ready for racial prime time. So this includes regular whites, liberal whites, and unfortunately, some who claim to be anti-racist whites. So let me end by tying up some crucial things I highlighted today. First, so poor whites are not the reason why we have racism in the country. Yeah? We don't have some kind of reverse racist socialism because now supposedly the interests of poor whites are reflected in them. That's like some nonsense. Yeah? So as I argued, we shall not vilify poor and working class whites for Trump victory or for racism in the nation. Racism is society-wide, and therefore all whites participate, and we participate as victims. Yeah? But I'm not suggesting a return to the workers of the world approach to politics, sort of class over race, or I'm not supporting the argument of Jennifer Hofschild, has become sort of the new thing, of dealing with the anxieties, the class anxieties of poor whites. They do have class anxieties, but these are also class race anxieties. Yeah? So until you connect, you are missing the boat. Yeah? So I want to have empathy to poor folks, but who's going to be empathetic to my kind? Because when whites are having a cold, we're having pneumonia. Okay? Second, since the election of Reagan in 1980, we all but abandoned the white working class. We stopped doing the radical political and ethical work we should always do, which is work with as many people as possible in the effort to build a new society. Yeah? The white working class, as much as the white middle class, is deeply racialized. So I'm not saying the work will be easy. Okay? However, they have fractures, and we should be able to work with them. Third, if nothing else, we learned in this last election that emotions, particularly racialized emotions, matter in forging political action and behavior. On the side of Hillary Clinton, no emotion. He couldn't connect with anyone. Yeah? Trump may not be able to put together a sentence. But boy, he connected. And think about this. This billionaire connected emotionally with the white masses. Okay? Because he knew how to talk a little bit about class issues, and then race issues, and gender issues, and all kinds of other emotions. Yeah? So therefore, I believe we need a materialist interpretation of racism that includes emotions. Racialized emotions are central in our subjectivity. Hence, if we wish to develop a politics for unearthing the deep roots of racism, we must deconstruct the emotional soul of white folks. Lastly, I'm going to finish with this. I do not work on theory as an exercise in self-love. Marx actually had a quote where he says that, so he talked about intellectual masturbation. That's not my thing. It's a quote from Marx, check it out. Some of you Google the stuff. Dr. Google will give you the truth. Yeah. Albeit theory, or data for that matter, has not liberated anyone in history. Theoretical practices done in tandem with political engagement can help change the world. Better racial theory, for example, can help us craft stronger, deeper social movements to help us decode and reorganize the consciousness and politics that emanate from the white race-class nexus. Theory, as Karl Marx stated, can become material force. So in his words, the weapon of criticism cannot, of course, replace criticism by weapons. Material force must be overthrown by material force. But theory also becomes a material force as soon as it's gripped by the masses. Theory is capable of gripping the masses as soon as it demonstrates ad hominem, and it demonstrates ad hominem as soon as it becomes radical. To be radical is to grasp the root of the matter. But for man, the root is man himself. Okay, that's it for me.